and we're going to get started. So again, welcome to the Church of Jesus Christ with prayers that God will bless you. I'm going to use a phrase, and it's a heavy phrase. And I don't know what your reaction to this phrase is going to be, but I have some assumptions. The phrase is the fear of God. Boom, 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 boom. The fear of God. It just carries not a burden at all, but added weight to it. There's a soberness to the phrase that brings a seriousness to the room immediately. I don't know if that's good or bad. I think at times it's really good. I think at other times it might be less than good. And I think at times we use it properly. I think at other times it can be a hindrance to the truth. And it's because of the word fear. It's because of what we carry into the conversation because of our interpretation of fear. So if I were to ask you, and I'm not, but if I were to ask you, is fear a good thing or a bad thing? I already know the answer, so I'm not going to ask you. And yet, meaning I've come to my conclusion on how you were going to answer, by the way, filled with judgment. And yet, fear sustains us. And I'm going to make a case today that fear should not be sustained. So just bear with me and we'll clarify as we go. I'm going to read you a couple things about fear by way of definition, and maybe a couple things that fear is manifested, how fear is manifested. But today, don't be confused. I am making a case for the fear of God. Critical. When utilized properly, it's critical in your walk. And it has a twin that should never be separated from it. Courtney, help me. When they're not identical, they are, say it? Paternal. I don't know the first letter. Oh, paternal. So these are paternal twins, okay? To be sure, not fraternal. Is it fraternal identical? They're not fraternal. These are paternal twins. Am I saying it right? What's that? Fraternal. Okay, let's restart. These are not identical twins. Okay, they're not identical twins, but twins nonetheless should not be separated. Good. I think it's because of our experiences with fear, because of our interpretation of fear, because of all the other ways fear, or many, and maybe even most of the other ways fear is manifested. It's not a feel-good phrase. Yet it's an integral, I say integral, but an integral part of your walk with God. Okay, good. If you read the word, it's requested, it's demanded, it's advised. Depending on which verses you read, it is critical to your walk, the fear of God. So here's what we know. You'll never be without fear in your life. And so if you've chosen to walk with the Lord, you'll never be without the fear of God in your life. It only makes sense. In short-term, fear is very good. Very good. It's life-saving. If I walked without fear into a highway, I think you know the conclusion to the story. If I walk without fear and I don't know how to swim into the deep end of the pool, you know the end of the story. Fear is critical and it's good. It sustains us and it helps us survive. So I want to be sure that you understand that. And then I'll make this case, then why wouldn't fear serve just as critically, just as importantly, just as strongly to help you survive spiritually? And so we attach the fear of God to the phrase so that we understand. I'm going to read you a couple definitions. Here's some notes that I made. Fear can wear us down. Fear can exhaust us. Important in the short term. Remember what I said earlier. Critical to in short-term bursts. But when it stays with us and weighs on us, it works against us. It can paralyze us. It can restrain us. It can cause us to stay in our proverbial rooms and our literal rooms at times. I don't even want to go out. And I want to just add this with tenderness, understandably. I understand that. That can be the effects of fear. And yet here I am making a case for fear. Fear can cause panic. This is a piece I didn't know I learned this week. Fear has been proven to be chemically addictive. Someone who is overtaken by fear or anxiety, it feeds and sustains and maintains itself. In fact, it grows. That doesn't sound good, right? So here I'm making a case for, I'm making a case against. What I'm making the case for is that you are able to separate and discern and decipher. Passed a lot of churches in the last, 3 years, probably post-COVID, I guess, with big signs on them. No fear here. I'm not going in there. No fear here. I'm not going to that church. And I understand what they are attempting to say to us, but I find it a foolish statement. Selective fear. Now we're talking. Spiritually discerned fear. Now we're talking. No fear. It's not a good conclusion. It's not a good solution, that's for certain. All right. I came up with a phrase too many years ago to tell you, back in 1943. So I don't know when I came up with this phrase. And now it's a little self-absorbed when I make this statement, but I'll make it anyhow. I love the phrase. And here it is. Reverse. Fear drives you into the water. Love drives you out. And if I leave that without explanation and without further explanation, I'm worried that it's not enough. And yet I've repeated that often without explanation at times. So I'm going to offer a little explanation and then take you a little further. Fear drives you into the water means we all make an assessment at some point in our lives. We all take accountability, and I would add finally, we all take accountability for our status and where we are. And as was the case with Belshazzar, we were weighed in the proverbial balance and we were found wanting. We came short. We found ourselves filled with sin and guilt and shame and no way to get back to God. And so it was that fear assessed properly, that fear of God as the inspiration and incentive to ask for our baptisms. Let me start again. Fear drives us into the water. And if it drove us into the water where we were safe, where we found our salvation, where we found our connection with Jesus Christ, then why not stay there? Okay, wrinkled toes might be a good argument against, but other than wrinkled toes, why not stay in the water? That's where we were safe. What drove us out other than the elder maybe taking us out of the water? I want to stay. I'm not listening to that. Why didn't we stay in the water? We found everything in that spot. No longer fear. Love drove us out. Love for God and love for others. We went out with purpose. I want everyone to feel this, what I just experienced. I want everyone to feel washed, cleansed, refreshed. So love drives us out of the water. And there we've identified the twins. Fear and love. Not identical twins, but twins nonetheless. Fear of God, the love of God. Both critical to your walk. Both necessary. Both with different purposes. One drives us in, one drives us out. I think about my own experience, and it was with my parents. And I was making decisions, and that's all that needs to be said. I was making poor decisions, and that's all that needs to be said or identified with any specifics. There was a specific night that I could take us to, but it's less important than understanding in general speak that I was making decisions that I was weighing through the litmus test of fear. And it was a fear of my father. And so I was weighing, if I do this, is it worth his wrath? And in most cases, if not all cases, I rationalized that it was worth it. And I went forward. And it was one particular evening when I had that thought, that justifiable question, and I asked differently. He started with, is it worth his wrath? And then I thought, is it worth the disappointment that I would see in my mother's eyes if she found out what I'm doing? That was the night that I stopped making specific bad decisions in my life. Fear has a burst effect, but love washes over us and maintains us. That doesn't mean fear has no place to revisit. That doesn't mean that fear has no place to come back and re-inspire good behavior if we're choosing wrongly. But if fear weighs on us daily, it exhausts. Do you understand that? I want you to understand that. So these two twins work in conjunction with each other. Twin number one, fear, is your starting point. And I'm going to prove that in a moment. Twin number one is your starting point. Twin number one can revisit when you need restarted. Candace and I rented a car. We did one of our long trips in 2 days, like we've often done in our lives. Having lost her cousin, one of her favorite human beings on this earth, Janet Gibson was just an angel. And Candace and I talked about her going and coming back from the Aliquippa. And I'm just amazed at the people that I saw over the last 48 hours, actually 36 hours when we were there. Every single person told story after story after story after story after story. All of them sounded so similar, all of them in honor of this this tender lady. So it was extraordinary to have gone there, and we're celebrating this woman's life. So we're thankful for her. So let's go back to fear and love. So fear continues to inspire us to make these good decisions. I want you to understand that, especially when we choose poorly. I can't sugarcoat that, especially when we choose poorly. Fear has to be reintroduced. But what I learned, I'll say and, I'll take but out of that sentence. And what I learned that evening as a 14-year-old young person, when I weighed the reaction of my mother and my father, is that fear and love are entwined. And it's very difficult to separate them. As I was considering my mother's disappointment, considering that I would let her down, that's fear. It's love, most certainly, but that's fear. What we learn as we mature spiritually is that the fear of God is not that he's going to squash me like a little ant. That's the fear that drove me into the water, by the way. But that type of fear is replaced with a deeper, more understanding, I think even more palpable fear, which is a fear of disappointing. And that fear is laced with love. I no longer fear God that he's going to just end me. I fear to see, like I feared with my mom, to see disappointment in his eyes. And that fear holds me. That's the fear that sustains me. It's not a weighty fear. It's an uplifting fear. It's an inspiring fear. I believe this to be a facet, the sustaining facet to the fear of God. I am not redefining the original fear of God. Please hear that, because that fear is necessary. My son had an experience recently, and I think I told it on a Tuesday, but I may not have told it on a Sunday. And in this experience, he went to sleep, just praying to God before he went to sleep and asking him, was he choosing well? We'll put it that way. And I think the phrase that Kylie used with God is he asked him, am I on the wrong path? Or he may have said, am I on the right path? I think he chose a positive question rather than, but am I on the right path? And if not, tell me. And he awakened after falling asleep praying. He awakened to paralysis. He could not move. I know there's a word for that, and I don't know what it is. I apologize. But he could not move laying in bed. I've not experienced this. But I've heard it and I understand it. He couldn't move, and he awakened to a fear. And then he turned his eyes from his bed and looked around. Maybe, I don't know the story, so I'm going to make it up as I go. But I think he was searching, how you look, he needs help. And as he looked one way, he had a vision. And I'm going to temper my words for little people. Okay, so understand. But he clearly saw in this vision his enemy in his room. And it created an overwhelming concern. And he immediately began to pray, dear God, I understand, I hear you. I see that you've answered my question. I don't know if he said this, but what I would say is stop answering. I get it. Okay, I get it. Stop answering. And as he prayed to God, he was immediately freed. The whatever it was that he saw in his room in that moment was gone. And he said it inspired him to get back on the path. Fear of God in bursts helps get us back. Fear of God, when it sustains, keeps us on. That fear is not a fear of a vision, is not a fear of being paralyzed. That fear is a fear of disappointing. And when we get to a certain level of spirituality, of oneness with God, that fear is much greater than any other fear. The fear of disappointing our Lord keeps us on the path. The love for our Father is much greater than the love I had for my mother in that moment as a 14-year-old. So the love that we have for our Father is much greater, keeps us on the path. Twins, not identical, always together, always utilized in tandem to help us stay on the path. The problem that we have deciphering and dissecting is that we bring our natural fears into the equation each time, right? We're acquainted with fear. I'm married to someone who loves scary movies. I don't understand it. I don't understand it. Given this, I always say she's half Italian and half, do I say kitty cat can? Poodle, half kitty, half Italian, half poodle. She's definitely Italian. If you've been in our home and she's fed you, she's definitely Italian. If you've seen her hands flailing when she talks, she's definitely Italian. If you've seen her shake like this, she's definitely half poodle. So why would this person, this nervous little sweet thing, like scary movies? So if she's shaking by nature, now she's trembling afterward, but she loves her scary movies. That's the fear we equate too often when we try to define what fear is. And it goes on. Fears. Want to hear some fears? Fear of inadequacy. This is in order, 10 to 1. Reversal, top 10. Fear of inadequacy, fear of getting hurt, fear of something bad happening. Search for good fears in this list. None. Fear of being judged, fear of loss of freedom, fear of change, fear of loneliness, fear of uncertainty, fear of failure, fear of rejection. Those are the top 10 fears. Anyone here fear God, by the way, in that list? Nowhere. They're only, so fear to us has this negative connotation, and I'm trying to clean it up for you today, trying to help you understand that fear of God is a different fear. It's the one that sustains and keeps you. It's the one that walks in tandem with the love of God. Fear drives you into the water. Proverbs 1:7. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. When did your walk begin? Now, let's not go deep and say, oh, when we were born, we began our walk with the Lord. I'm with you on that. I know that. When I had my first experience with God, I was 5 years old. I know that too. But when did you officially begin your walk with the Lord? What was it that started your walk with the Lord? In official terms, it was fear. Fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. What that means, at least in my interpretation here, is you chose the Lord. Others have that same fear, and some of them choose to stay unlearned. They choose they choose against that wisdom that God is inspiring. Proverbs 9:10. See if this sounds familiar, or at least similar. First one was Proverbs 1:7, for those of you who are write things down. Proverbs 9:10. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the holy is understanding. How did you begin your walk? The fear of God. How did you get back on the path? The fear of God. I smile when I say that because this is good. I had a fear of Letty Obradovich that was beautiful. She got me back on the path because she loved me. Not because she was going to punish me. She was not the punisher in my family. Oh, but to see disappointment in her eyes, it changed me. To consider the disappointment that you might cause God will change you when you think of it that way. And you'll embrace the fear of God as a good thing. You are redefining fear against the top 10 list I just gave you. Psalms 11:10. Wonder how this is going to begin. Let's see. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, as if we haven't heard that already. A good understanding have all they that do his commandments. His praise endureth forever. That is a person of understanding. They live under the flag that flies, fear of the Lord. And they don't see this as a bad thing. Raise that flag every day with joy. I love my Father. Fear of the Lord. Raise that flag. Here's how we're introduced to the Lord. Okay, here's that other fear. Alma 36:7. He spake unto us as if it were the voice of thunder, and the whole earth did tremble beneath our feet. That flag's a tough one to raise up, by the way. This is the tough fear of the Lord to raise up. And we fell to the earth, for the fear of the Lord came upon us. Excuse the colloquialism, but them's the fear I've been telling you about at first. That's the one that'll shake you. That's the one that'll drive you to the ground. That's the one that drives you into the water. That fear when you shake and quake before the Lord, because I've taken accounting of myself. And I am not in a good place. I've got to fix this. It's not just the disappointment in his eyes. It's what awaits me after this life of bad decision making. That's the fear that causes the earth to shake. It's a good fear. I just don't want the earth shaking twice because of me. July 27th, that earth shook. I heard. I went into the water. God forbid that earth ever shake because of me again. But the fear remains nonetheless. 1 John 4:18. Is this in conflict with anything you've heard? Absolutely not. This is a different fear I'm going to tell you about now. We have the Holy Spirit within us. We have been given the gift to understand and discern and dissect. We have to utilize that so that we don't get caught up in no fear here. Instead, no fear when it's appropriate. Raise that flag. Fear when it's appropriate. I'll raise that flag right beside the other one. Fear is good. Fear is bad. It's what fear we're talking about. John writes this: there is no fear in love, but perfect love casteth out fear. How could that be the fear of God that he's speaking of? Absolutely not. Could that be a good fear that inspires us to stay out of traffic? Don't swim with the sharks? No. This is a fear that overtakes us, that pulls us down, that whispers from evil sources, that paralyzes us in our sleep and stands over us, ready to take us off path. That's the fear this verse is speaking of. There is no fear in love, but perfect love casteth out fear, because fear hath torment. I'm going to ask you this. It's rhetorical again. No answers, please. Have you ever felt the torment of fear? It's a terrible thing. It's a terrible thing. Sometimes it's so small. Sometimes that torment is so small, but you feel your stomach tighten up. Oh. And it's over, most of the time, it's over things that never manifest. I wish I weren't familiar with this. I wish I didn't understand when I just told you about the torment. Unfortunately, I too have experienced that. Because fear hath torment. He that feareth is not made perfect in love. What he's saying is, if you allow fear, that bad fear, to continue, love has no place. It can't get in. We have to allow God's love to wash over us. This is not the fear that is tandem with the love of God. This is a natural fear. We all know 2 Timothy. I'll say it, but we all know it. For God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. Psalms 34:4. I sought the Lord, he heard me and delivered me from all my fear. That's the fear we're kicking out of our lives. That's the fear that they're saying, no fear here. I understand the intention of their poster outside. I just disagree with the sweeping statement, no fear here. It can confuse. It can make us feel bad. It can make us feel guilty. It can make us feel shame. I'll end with this. I have so many other verses. You get the point. I think you get the point. So I'll end with this. It's John 14:27. And it's just beautiful. So how do I get there, Doug? How do I get to this place that you're speaking of? John 14:27 captures the Savior's words. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give unto you. Not as the world gives, give I unto you. Let not your heart be troubled, neither let it be afraid. I will overcome the fear that torments. I will overcome the fear that attacks you. I will overcome the fear that ties you, paralyzes you in your bed. But I'm not just gonna gift it to you. I'm looking for you to return that to me. We went to this funeral and we heard these beautiful stories of love with our sister. We heard stories of how she was loved by the Lord and how she loved the Lord back. Testimony after testimony during the sermons of experiences and examples of how this woman knew the Lord intimately through her love for him and the purity of a fear for him. Not a fear to shake and quake, a fear that she would never do anything disrespectful or harmful to her relationship. She claims to be 5'2". She's not. Tiny little wife of mine. When we were young, I would work out and I would go. I turned our little garage. We were in a little dinky home and that we loved, by the way, that we were so thankful for our first home. But this tiny little home was so small that I had to turn our garage into another room. We needed another room. We had more children. And she gave me the last, 5 feet of the garage, and I built a wall in there and I put my bench on the other side, away from the family, so I could work out. So I continued to get stronger as a young person, and she continued to take care of everything in our lives. Never caught up with me in strength, never. I don't say that in pride, it just is. And yet, I feared her then, I fear her today. And it's not that she has a bite, she has no bite at all. Tender heart, sweetest woman on this earth. I fear disappointing my wife. When temptations and bad things are in front of me that would put in question our relationship or show some disrespect to her, the fear of Candace overwhelms me. I'm stronger. I'm bigger. She can't touch me physically. She owns me emotionally. That's the fear that drives us to our knees with the Lord. That's the fear. And if I can find that fear in this tiny little thing, how can't we find that for God Almighty, the Creator? He who loves in ways we'll never understand. He who forgives in ways we'll never touch. How can't I have that fear for him? The fear to disappoint him. The fear that would cause him to disapprove of what we do. I want you to understand and no longer see fear as a negative thing as it relates to God. Fear those ridiculous movies that Candace chooses, those scary movies. Fear those all day long. But don't fear like that with God. Fear that we would do something to even cause him. If you read the time of Noah, you want to fear God? You want to understand real fear of God? In the time of Noah, you think I'm going to the flood. I'm not. I'm going to the phrase that he says he repented that he had created. Insert your name here. Could you imagine that he would repent that he created you? I don't need a flood to scare me. I don't need the threat of a flood. The fear that overwhelms me is that I would disappoint him to such degree that he would be sorry that he ever made me, and certainly that he ever called me, that he ever chose me. The fear of God is a beautiful thing when it's intertwined with the love of God. So I present to you the title of our sermon today, the theme of our sermon. It's this: not whether we should. Hear that, not whether we should, but how we should. The question is not, should we fear God? That's not even a question. The question is, how should we fear God? Fear that you would disappoint him. Fear that you would cause him to question your love for him. There's a verse in 3 Nephi that speaks to a time, and I don't know the verse, and I'm not going to quote it, but I'm going to tell it to you. It speaks to a time when the people were praying, turned their hearts to the Lord. And it said, he did smile down upon them. Fear that he would frown when he thought about you. Desire that he would smile down upon you in all that you do. Fear, not whether we should, but how. May the Lord bless you with an understanding, maybe a new understanding, maybe an amended understanding, but an understanding that fear is a good thing. May he bless you with that understanding. May you understand that that's just your way of saying to the Lord, I love you. Because love and fear are twins, inseparable, but not identical. May the Lord bless each one of you.
Wow.